Hey there, RemPCs. Welcome to Rules of Cool, where we interview very special guests, creators, gamers, designers, and world builders. I'm your host, Rem, and today we are talking about Sixth World stories with some of the best historians and world builders of Shadowrun. And then stay tuned because up next at 5 p.m. Pacific time is the third episode of our actual play of Shadowrun Sixth World Emerald Glitch. But first, don't forget that you can support our wonderful partners at Fragging Unicorn Games by going to the Kickstarter and backing Misspent Youth Issue 3, Fall in Love, Not in Line. In fact, next week, we'll be right here with the creator of Misspent Youth, Robert Bull, the owner of Fragging Unicorns, OC Opti Presley, and lead developer of Issue 3, Clifton Lambert, for a very special interview. Additionally, after that episode of Rules of Cool, we'll be playing Misspent Youth on our monthly one-shot show, allowing our Shadowrunners to take a well-earned break. But now it's time to get right into our conversation for this week, so stay tuned. Hey everyone, welcome back. We are here with some very special guests today. We've been talking about Shadowrun for a couple weeks. I'm really excited for this one because we get to tell the stories of the Sixth World. So I'm Rem and I'm here with four very special guests. I'd like you all to introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about what got you into Shadowrun and what Shadowrun related work that you've done. So let's start with Joel.
Well, hi, I'm Joel, also known as Gardamonger. Maybe the second or third time I've actually shown my face on a Shadowrun stream, so hello. What got me into Shadowrun is the original cover, 1989 original core rulebook, Shadowrun first edition, and the imagery is iconic to this day, and it brought me in. And now I'm on a podcast with some, ne'er-do-wells and kind of crazy people like, I think I see a few of them here as well. But I've also gotten to work on playtesting some of the Catalyst work and kind of providing, as best I can, a little bit of world building in the in-between places like food and drink and the political machinations that make the world go round.
Excellent. Glad to have you here, Joel. Clifton, how about you? Oh, you are muted, my friend. Just kidding.
Okay, how about this? I remembered that Zoom has to have the focus to be able to hear me. Okay, sorry about that. I'll start again. Hello, I am Clifton Lambert. I am, that is my author nom de plume. You may also know me as Mr. Johnson of the Arcology podcast. I have published the longest running actual play for Shadowrun that is out there in podcast world, and a bunch of other content talking about Shadowrun. But I also have gotten to write for Shadowrun. I wrote the novella Kill Penalty, which is an urban brawl story. That was a lot of fun. I think it turned out pretty good. And I've also gotten to write a lot for the Anarchy 2050 book. And more recently, I've been writing a lot of rules stuff for 6th edition, some of the new books that are coming out, like the Shadowrun Companion with the alternate character creation rules, bunch of qualities, and I'm talking too long, so I'm going to pass the mic.
Not at all. Love all the contributions you've done. Jennifer, how about you?
My name's Jennifer Brozak. I am an author, editor, and media tie-in writer. I do this full time. My introduction to Shadowrun is back in 1992, where I became the night test lead on Sega Genesis's Shadowrun game. And that's where I started there. So let's see. Since then, I became a proofer for Shadowrun. That was back in the Sprite and Adam Jury days. Then I started writing fiction with Seattle 2072. And these days, I am only a fiction writer. I write novels, novellas, and short stories. My most recent novel is Elfin Black. And it's set in the Seattle area. I got to stat out Snohomish, and I call it my daddy issues book because what do you do with a powerful mage who suddenly becomes powerless because of his own father? Yeah, you deal with it any way you can. I also have written the first young adult series in Shadowrun, the novella series that starts with A Kiss to Die For and See How She Runs. And I have been contracted for Unrepairable and the Kilimanjaro Run. And so far my novels have all started off as short stories I've written for the Shadowrun anthologies. So Makeda Red came off of Rune's Avatar Cafe, and Elfin Black came off of Dark Side Matters. And if I get my way, I have 2 other novels that I would like to write, wrapping up a series, a bunch of stuff that I have put down. Because if you read my Shadowrun stuff, you will see a crossover from different Shadowrun characters going from one story to another, maybe as a side character, maybe as the hero or villain of the story.
That's awesome. I've been just getting into the Shadowrun novels, and one of the first ones I read was Makeda Red, and it's phenomenal. If you start somewhere with Shadowrun, you've got a good pick with Makeda. So
thank
awesome.
you. I also did a podcast called Shadow Bites, and I also wrote on the Shadowrun Returns video game that continues the Sam Werner storyline 21 years later after I started it with Sega Genesis. Sega? No, Nintendo.
It's been a long time.
It's been a very long time.
I definitely have more questions about that as we get into this, so thank you. Last but not least, I have my friend OC Opti Presley.
Jennifer, I had no idea that you went back to those old video games. That was actually my introduction to Shadowrun, so that's pretty dope. I am Opti. You probably know me from the Neo-Anarchist podcast, which is an in-character, year-by-year history of the Shadowrun universe lore. Also do produce the Shadowrun Origins podcast, which is actual play through the classic adventures from the golden age of Shadowrun. As far as stuff I've done officially, I started writing for Shadowrun a couple of years ago and did Shadowrun Anarchy, Chicago Chaos, and was the lead for Anarchy 2050. I did a short story in the Drawing Destiny anthology called Lovers at a Dangerous Time. And then recently just had a novella release called Kings of the Street. But then other than that, did a lot of business in the later parts of Shadowrun 5th edition, Cutting Aces, Book of the Lost, Forbidden Arcana, Dark Terrors. I did a lot of stuff in Kill Code and Better Than Bad. Those are the ones that I think I put the most words into and were best received. But then also a ton of words in the Neo-Anarchist Streetpedia as well. And I'm still just hanging around. But other than that, that's what I've done. What we'll do in the future, who knows?
You mentioned Anarchy 2050.
Yeah, yeah. I was a lead on Anarchy 2050, where I had to call Cliff and say, "Hey, a couple of writers bailed out. You want to write the whole book for me?"
But my scope of that project went from I'll do 10,000 words to I want to say it was over 36,000 when it was all said and done.
Yeah, it was fantastic. Yeah, Cliff and I worked quite well. Oh, and I should say that Joel was being modest. When I first started writing, Joel and I would just sit for hours tossing ideas back and forth. And so he's a lot of the shadow inspiration for a lot of the stuff that I wrote.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
All right. So you guys mentioned some of the fiction that you've worked on in terms of novellas and the fiction novels themselves. can you guys give us some, those of you who have worked on fiction, can you give us some of the story arcs so that anyone looking to get into Shadowrun and start reading the novels can pick something that resonates specifically with them? Let's start with Clifton.
Yeah, I guess well, I've got my novella, which was Kill Penalty. It's an urban brawl story, and urban brawl is a sport that is unique to Shadowrun. It originally started from a sort of formalized gang warfare that got picked up as a sport, where essentially you try to get the ball into your opponent's goal, and everybody has guns, and some people have motorcycles, and it takes place in an urban environment. And I've just found the idea of urban brawl to be so much fun. Like in real life, of course, horrible dystopian would be terrible. People getting killed playing sports is just par for the course. Bad thing. But as a fiction idea, it's just so much fun. And so I came up with an idea for a character for that. And I didn't want to do just a straight up, here's some urban brawl stuff that goes on. So I came up with a story arc where the character is getting but I also wanted to involve shadow running besides the sport. So the character Redlock is a really, really good. He's a protege of a famous urban brawl player who had to retire due to an injury, and she's putting all of her hopes into her adopted son and is really, really hard at him, super, super high pressure. And he does really awesome, but she never has any praise for him, and it bothers him. But eventually he gets framed for cheating in an urban brawl game by Shadowrunners. They managed to do something. I don't know if you want the details. Yeah, I'll drop it in. So there's a little thing in Shadowrun called alchemy, where you can put a spell into a physical object that can then be triggered later. In urban brawl, magic is not allowed. It's illegal. And so you've got astral referees watching for signs of magic going on. So what they did, what the Shadowrunners did, was they managed to infiltrate this party before a big game, and Redlock has these cybernetic implant long hair because his hair didn't grow naturally because he got so much cyberware installed in him while he was a growing teenager by his mom. And so they made a perfect sort of focus object for placing an alchemical spell on. So a very skilled alchemist managed to sneak up and put an alchemy spell on his hair, and then shielded it and hit it. And then that person snuck into the urban brawl field and waited so that they could manually trigger it at a certain time. And yeah, Redlock did some cool stuff and basically went to almost win the game for his team at an important moment. And then the refs showed up and he got called out for cheating. And considering a game where people die as the sport, people give their lives to get points. The idea of a teammate selling their other teammates out by trying to cheat, well, your life is on the line. So Redlock has to flee into the shadows and try to make a life. Tries to make a life as a Shadowrunner, not really cut out for it. Gets sucked into the sort of amateur league urban brawl where they use gel rounds instead of real bullets. Does really well there. Has a sort of story arc where he gets to know the characters, and it's really first he's really reluctant. It feels like it's beneath him, but it's getting back into the game. And as soon as his mother comes back with an offer to get him back into the pro league with the assistance of some mafia contacts if he helps throw the game at this important amateur league thing. So I won't tell any more that what's going on. I think I've revealed enough of the story, but that's sort of his big choice and character arc at the end. And he has to deal with whether he's going to do the right thing or the wrong thing, or what his mother tells him to do. The deal with the fallout. It was a lot of fun to write, and I have to say, big props to the editor, who I really should remember her name. Nuts. I'll have to look it up to name drop it later in the stream here. Apologies, but she did such a good job with helping me pull out what was really important about the story elements, and cut out some of the fat that was just like, here's some cool Shadowrun stuff that I thought was neat, but doesn't really mean much to the story other than here's some Shadowrun flavor. So it was grueling going through the editing process. I felt like I was the worst writer who ever tried to write anything but it took me a number of extra months to go through and do that. But man, it's so much better of a story because of it. And I really took it to heart that like whatever the editor says is right, no matter how I feel about it. So.
Well, I love hearing the stories. Because Shadowrun stories are fun, but also hearing the writers talk about them, like you can really get that excitement and that passion, and like you said, that sense of fun from writing it. And then of course the honesty of the process and everything too. I think that's what's really cool about these kinds of conversations. So
if I have another sort of funny story relating to this, if I'm not taking too much time.
Go right ahead. We've
right.
got time.
So I didn't really plan on being a Shadowrun writer or a writer really, but I hang out with a lot of writers just as a Shadowrun podcaster, going to the cons and meeting people. And the way I got into writing Shadowrun, the way I got into writing this novella was I'm just hanging out with some of the other Shadowrun writers outside of a restaurant late at night at Gen Con. And John Helfers, the fiction lead for Catalyst, just comes walking up. He's talking to people like, hey, what are you doing about this? And it looks to me like, all right, Cliff, what are you going to get me a novella? Like, I'm just standing next to authors. He's like, but how about Urban Brawl? He's like, oh, awesome. And he gave me a hug, and like, then now I had to write a novella.
So. That was Rusty and Cliff and I were standing outside. And John comes stumbling out. Was talking to Rusty and I about the novellas. That was pretty epic. And Cliff walked away like, did I just get to write a novel?
That's my writer origin story.
I love it. A superhero was born. Excellent.
Well, we'd be remiss not to mention Rusty's Kincaid series just briefly, because that's another great, I think, intro for a lot of people into Shadowrun these days. Is Rusty, who's another one of the kind of lore monkeys of Shadowrun and involved in the Facebook Shadowrun Union, and one of the people you can recognize as what I have heard called the elfiest man in all of gaming, has a great series of novellas and novels about Seattle and a burned out mage PI. It's an archetypal Shadowrun story and conceit that he breathes life into and gives kind of this moving and three-dimensional weight to, that lets you kind of feel the rain on your shoulders, kind of feel that weight.
Rusty is one of my favorite Shadowrun authors. He's so supportive. And a lot of times if I can't get a hold of Jason Hardy for a question, I grab Rusty and he'll just stop everything and answer. So yeah, the Kincaid series, pretty damn awesome.
He's he was one of those legends of Shadowrun when I was starting to get into Shadowrun late, like within the last 5 years or so, maybe 6 or 7 now. But and I heard all the stories of the Shadowcasters and stuff like that. But eventually I heard about Rusty, and I heard that like he went into his office one day or one weekend, closed the door, and did not emerge again until the novel was finished within the weekend or something like that. And that everyone was like, wow. So that was my first Rusty experience story. Excellent. Well, Jennifer, can you tell us a little bit about some of your stories?
Well, I think if you want to get into Shadowrun or get someone interested in Shadowrun who knows absolutely nothing of the world, Dockwagon 19, my first novella.
That was you?
That was me. Yeah. It's basically about a high threat response team, Dockwagon. They're basically ambulances with guns, and the legal ability to come in and kick ass as needed to get to their client. And so what I wanted to do was I did a novella from the point of view of a reporter, Simone Hart, with stories with heart. And it was I had 2 points of view. I had the first person point of view, and I had the TV show going on, because she interviewed everybody, and you get a real good interest look into the world of Shadowrun from the outside of the shadows. But as you discover, people who are part of the Dogwagon team have a history within the shadows, and no matter how long and how far and how fast they flee the shadows never let go. They always follow. You always have a shadow. And that comes into play throughout. And I introduced the different archetypes. You know, I've got the face, I've got the mage, I even have an urban brawler who became a member of the team. I have Simeon, who is a hacker kid who is a black hat who got convinced to become a white hat or go to jail because, you know, something that he did. So that story, I think, is a really good introduction. And I will say, characters from that story have appeared in other stories. I had to write a story for Gamma, and somebody that they rescued in that story was starred in the Gamma story, Between a Corp and a Hard Place. And then after that, the stories I like to, I call them, they're micro stories in a macro universe. I try to pull them very intimately. I don't want to write the metaverse story. That's not my strength. My strength is to bring you in, make you care about one or two people, and then rip your heart out.
Yep.
Because I kill a lot of people fictionally.
Yeah,
even teenagers, but that's more in the BattleTech side of things that I write.
I have to pause you because I think it was fall that I read. It's Sprawl Stories Volume 1 or something like that. That one's in, and I loved all the stories that were in there. But that was one where, for those who don't know in our audience, I record some of the audiobooks for Shadowrun, and I immediately messaged Helfers and was like, "Tell me I can do Dockwagon 19," and he's like, "It's already been done," and I'm like, "No." It is such a great story, and I loved the outside perspective of like thinking of it from the reporter's perspective as a ride along. I thought it was such a different perspective and take than a normal Shadowrun where, like, okay, first thing we get a call from the Johnson, we go to a meet, we do the negotiation, time for legwork, like, you know, the process. And this was something totally different, and I really loved that. So sorry, I had to fangirl for a minute there.
Thank you. I appreciate that. A lot of Shadowrunners don't wake up going one day, I'm going to be a criminal. I'm going to run the shadows. Most people really just want to live their life and be left alone. So I like to write a lot of origin stories about how people got there. And, you know, Simone is a fun character. She does show up in Elfin Black towards the end. I enjoyed bringing her back in because she is a personality. But what John Helfers, who is my editor, and I love him to death, he will come to me and say, write me something that's not American based. I'm like, all right, I lived in Belgium. What did they have in Belgium? What do I know in Belgium? Okay, let's start with the party train. And I did I also, the Makeda Red story was Rune's Avatar Cafe was a direct homage to Casablanca. It was a movie I absolutely just adore. And the main character wouldn't let me go. And I'm like, okay, so how did she get there? So basically Makeda Red is an homage to Casablanca's backstory, because I had to look that up and figure out some of the stuff that happened there and see if I could pull in some of the references. I like to do some of the literary references around what I'm writing.
Awesome.
The interesting thing about Makeda Red and Elfin Black, they're not sequels, they're not trilogies or anything. But if I do end up writing the third in the color series, is what I'm sort of calling it, it'll be Imri Gray. And Imri, who is a very side character in Makeda Red, who appears as a major character in Elfin Black, would be starring in Imri Gray. And I realized, oh, I guess I'm actually kind of writing his sort of origin story across 3 books that are completely one-offs, because I like doing one-offs. I also like doing series. So
cool.
the the through line of the YA quartet is a fixer named Blotter Babe, who you've seen mostly as a bouncing smiley face, yellow smiley face. But she is so much more. And you'll find out if I actually get to write the Blotter Babe novel.
Well, I will message John right after our show tonight and start chastising.
Well, no, he would actually have me linked up to do all of these right now, but I have written the equivalent of 2 novels a year for the last 5 years. So I'm trying to slow it down a little bit because that's a lot of work. Because I don't just do Shadowrun. I do BattleTech. I do original work. I did some Arkham Horror. What else did I do? Oh, I'm now editing. I've edited 21 anthologies, not in the last 5 years, over the last 10 years.
Okay. Awesome.
If I could to just take a moment to I don't know what the NB term is, but fan them. You are definitely far and away my favorite BattleTech author. Your stuff is so good, and the way you incorporate just this emotional aspect and the psychological aspect of the characters just brings them to life so strongly and brings me into the world to a degree that I don't know. It's just, you're my favorite.
Oh, thank you. Micro stories in a macro universe, and growing up military, my entire family was military, so I really wanted Shadowrun not to be military because I've written a lot of it. So
cool.
BattleTech is a good home for that then.
Yeah.
Well, let's make our way over to Opti. Tell us about some of your fiction.
The first little short story I did in Drawing Destiny was called Lovers in a Dangerous Time. It was about a Jack Pointer named Aufheben, and he gets into some trouble while he's trying to assassinate a bunch of people at the top of the Burj Khalifa. And at the very last moment, like, he meets one of his old loves, and who happens to be a lion adept working for Mossad, and they get into some trouble and get some tension back and forth, remembering old times. And then again, not to spoil the ending, it's a very rather short story, but the assassination doesn't go off as planned, and Alphaben has to make quite a decision, which sort of changes the course of his life. Then the most recent thing that came out just a couple months ago was a novella called standalone novella called Kings of the Street, and that is about Picaro, who was an orc adept. He didn't know he was an adept at the beginning, but turns out he is, living in the undercity of Tenochtitlan in Aztlan, just trying to survive. His grandmother gets sick, and so he turns to pushing drugs to get by, falls in with the wrong crowd. They go to beat him up. He gets the crap knocked out of him, and then discovers his adept powers, which sort of kicks him higher, on the another gang that's higher than them wants a piece of that. So he goes and with this gang that's got a pretty dark and sinister connection with another sort of power. And over the course, Picaro has to wrestle with whether or not he embraces that side of who he is, or whether he wants to push back and claim another, maybe even more ancient destiny than that. But there's not a whole lot written in Aztlan as far as fiction. So if you're hankering for what happens on the street of Tenochtitlan, that's your best bet. Also, I mean, the elves and the humans get a lot of play, but there's not a whole lot of fiction focused solely on one little orc kid who's poor. I like that angle.
Awesome.
Too, so.
Awesome.
That's it for fiction. And then maybe we'll write some more. Who knows?
And then Joel, any specifics you'd like to call out? I know we talked about Rusty already.
I don't have my name on any particular fiction pieces. I will say that I may have helped with a comma splice or two that was in the draft of Chad Opti's work there, but I think everything we've talked about so far are really some of the best intros. And you see it in people like Jennifer, who have been there from the Sega game, which is so many people's intro to Shadowrun, and a narrative arc that was returned to in the Shadowrun Returns series, which brought more people into this game we love, to the new stories that Clifton's writing that is just one of those fresh voices and looks and kind of ways to see the world. And, Opti's good. He's cool. he does good stuff. I'm biased though. So there's a lot of like mutual fanning going on. And all I can say is that the people on this stream, who are not me, are the best people writing fiction that gets people into the world since kind of Nigel Findlay and the mid 90s major arcs that set the standard.
That's awesome.
I want to say, hop in here real quick though, and just say it's not directly Shadowrun related, but Joel did write a cookbook that is set in a cyberpunk fantasy future. So if you want to see Joel's cookbook, I put the link in the chat.
Awesome. Absolutely.
They are all functional recipes. You should be able to make just about any of them. And there's a whole lot of world building and fluff that goes into that on top of writing a literal technical cookbook.
That's really cool. So speaking of kind of taking that step away from fiction, what other contributions have you worked on as creators within the Shadowrun community? So like, for instance, Clifton and Opti, I became aware of you because I was at a convention, was like, those are the Shadowcasters. They do the podcasts. And I got all—
Who said that to you in that voice? I want to know who that was.
Scott Schlitz.
Okay.
So tell us about your podcast. Tell us about some of the non-official lore and stories that you've been telling through that. Opti, let's start with you because I know you're like Mr. History of Shadowrun.
Sure. So I got into Shadowrun for the second time because my D&D 4th game was sort of winding to a close, and I said, "Hey guys, let's try something else. Let's try Shadowrun," because that was a game that I loved from my youth. And they were like, "Well, we don't know anything about Shadowrun," and I thought, "No problem. I'll go find the podcast which tells us all about the history of Shadowrun. Then we could all play the game." And so there wasn't anything, and I thought, well, I'm going to record a little thing to get them into it. And as I started getting into it, I was like, wow, this is a lot more involved than I initially assumed. This is going to take more than one session. So I started creating, just a bunch of different recordings. And then I thought, if I want this, somebody else is going to want this. And so I released the Neo-Anarchist podcast at that time. And at that time, there was only maybe a handful, no, not even a handful. There was only 2 Shadowrun-focused podcasts. It was Critical Glitch and Hidden Grid, and both of those have since sort of stopped. But when we launched it, it was like really novel, and they took off like really, really quickly. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm all of a sudden a podcaster now, I guess. And then, well, anyway, I took a break from doing that because it was a little bit overwhelming, and some home stuff got overwhelming. But then, and I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but Cliff and Courtney, the Arcology podcast, they did like a little what was it, Cliff? It was like a—
Honestly, I don't even remember the details. We asked the listeners to contribute things. If we got a certain amount of them, you would have to do another episode.
Yeah, it was sort of like, if we get enough X or Y, then
little one-sentence ideas from people. Yeah,
Opti said he would come back and do more podcasts. So they got it, and I was like, oh, that's really sweet. And that's really kind of how I got to know Cliff and Courtney a lot better. And so I came back, started the podcast over. And then since then, Cliff has become one of my best friends in the entire world. And we collab on everything. But yeah, the Shadowrun, the Neo-Anarchist podcast is a year-by-year history in the Shadowrun universe, starting way back in 1989 and going forward. And that's been an incredible process of just sort of doing a lot of deep dives into all sorts of history, all sorts of, different nooks and crannies of the Shadowrun universe, and then presenting it in a way that's not complete forgery, and B, something that's engaging to people. And the response has been pretty incredible. So
yeah, and to give Opti even more praise, because that's what this show is about, is it's in these manageable bite-sized chunks. Like the first few episodes, I think, are like 8 minutes each or something, and it's kind of done from within character, where you're kind of communicating out to the runners, like the secret network kind of thing, and sharing that way, and sharing the stories of like, hey, did you hear about what happened with this corp fighting this corp? Well, this is the deal, kind of thing. And it's so it's a really manageable way to take on 30 years of lore without feeling overwhelmed. So, if you're new to Shadowrun, that's a great place to start, just to get some ideas. And if you want to start running a game, gosh, listen to 5 episodes of Neo-Anarchist, and you'll have plenty of material to have evil corpse and vicious Johnsons and whatever else coming your way.
There was this one really funny incident back. There's a podcast called Harmontown. It's Dan Harmon does his podcast with a group of his friends, and they usually do a D&D, right? And their GM is named Spencer. Well, like apparently Dan wanted to shift to doing Shadowrun, and so he went looking for something. Spencer did, and he came across the Neo-Anarchist podcast, and he was talking about it on, I think it was Reddit one time, and he goes, "Yeah, the Neo-Anarchist podcast is pretty much garbage, except the corporation episodes are really helpful." I thought that was the most well, let's see, it was a not backhanded compliment, it was a backhanded criticism. but I thought that was still funny, right? So Spencer liked my stuff, or listened to it enough to not like it. So
Amazing.
He also like went to one of the dark places of the internet to like talk about Shadowrun with people, and encountered the kind of people you encountered there, and then decided all Shadowrun fans are terrible people, and just generally like went on a rant on Twitter about how Shadowrun fans are awful. So yeah, that's that entire thing is basically as far as I've gone in the whole Harmontown Dan Harmon stuff, because that was my introduction to it. I'm like, nope. Not touching
I still
that.
enjoy Community.
Yeah, Community, I will not watch it, because my introduction to that is that guy just being a jerk to Shadowrun fans, because he had too thin of a, somebody was mean to him on the internet about his opinions about how night vision goggles work. Somebody was actually neckbeard about it, and like, whatever. That's not all. You don't take that and generalize a whole fan base. Okay, rant over.
There you go. Well, anyway, after that, we did Cliff and I and Bobby Frankenberger and Oz Russo made this little network called the Shadowcasters Network, and then we did a lot of really fun stuff together. And I think more than anything, the lasting result of that is just the friendships we made along the way. I know it sounds really corny, but it really was. Like, those guys are some of my best friends now. Even though the Shadowcasters sort of fizzled out, we did a lot of cool stuff. We did the first actual play.
We didn't fizzle out. We burned out.
We see you later, internet. we did the first actual play for Shadowrun 6th edition. We sort of dropped the news on 6th edition, and that was a fun time.
That was my first stream with you guys.
That's right. You were on that stream. I was like,
really you guys want to play with me?
Right, and then you realize, like, oh, they're just nerds.
What dorks. And I still hang out with you.
and it's something else that came out of this is I don't even remember when. It just, I think the Hidden Grid was a podcast that Justin Deal did that, and oh gosh, I'm drawing a blank. Joel, help me. Who did it before
Eric.
Justin? It was
Nolan. That's Nolan Zen.
Yeah, Zen did. And then they were doing a podcast that was sort of actual play. They were one of the first actual plays like ever. Like they had been doing Shadowrun actual plays like long before actual plays got popular. And they were running through some of the classic adventures. And then at a certain point, they came to me and they were like, "Hey, we're tired of running. would you like to run a game for us? And I was like, oh, Hidden Grid, hell yeah, I'd do that in a heartbeat. So I started running games for them, and then schedules got in the way, and I thought, you know what, this is too much fun. I want to keep doing this. So I got Joel, and I got Cliff, and I got Cat Bunt, and I got whoever else we got. Who else did we get?
James.
Well, we got James, and we got Chelsea, and we got a whole bunch of other folks, to run with us, and we got a couple of guest GMs that would come in, like their favorite old school Shadowrun modules. Like, you guys come in and you be the GM for this one, and then Cliff will step behind and play with us. So Shadowrun Origins has been going on for I don't know, years now, and we're just about to wrap up season 1 with our releases. But that means season 1 means that we've sort of gone through the first edition modules, and that's become a family as well. So I think the arc for me in Shadowrun is just gathering friends and family that care about each other. The dark, gritty underbelly of Magic Land is sort of just a backdrop for making cool friends and family.
So from Neo-Anarchist to Shadowrun Origins, Cliff, can you tell us a little bit about the Arcology and some of the other community contributions that you've put out?
Sure. I guess my origin in that is pretty similar to Chad's, in that I was looking for Shadowrun podcasts and didn't find enough. I found the Hidden Grid and Critical Glitch, but I had an hour commute back and forth to work every day. So that's a lot of podcast time I needed. Realized that I'd been wanting a podcast. I'd actually been mulling over the idea to do a podcast for a few years. Actually, a friend of mine that I gamed with ran a Call of Cthulhu campaign, started the Miskatonic University podcast. And that was a good, I think, couple of years before the Arcology started. So that sort of gave me, well, if he can do it, which is like, he basically like didn't have any sort of like technical expertise. He just learned what he had to learn, which is podcasting is very accessible thing for really anybody to get into if you're determined. And I, on the other hand, like, well, I've got a recording degree. I should be able to do this stuff. So I started a podcast with my wife, who I actually met through our Shadowrun gaming group a few years before. And her name is Courtney. She is also a Shadowrun author, CZ Wright. And it started podcasting about Shadowrun. So we made podcasts that were like talking about what is Shadowrun in general, what's the world like, as a way to something I've really been about, looking back from the beginning of this all the way through to my work on Misspent Youth, is that I want to make things accessible. I want to invite people to play. I want it to be easy to get into the game, and Shadowrun is not necessarily an easy game to get into. There are decades of lore to be intimidated by. There are complex rules to deal with. But it's also it's a great time. And I really wanted to just make it easier for people to grok what Shadowrun is and get into it. So started making episodes about how you play Shadowrun, how you approach maybe making a street samurai or a decker, and what you think about as far as like rules ideas, but also mindset and background, personality and such. And then I started an actual play podcast, which was just starting a story about some Shadowrunners in Seattle. And that, as I think I said at the beginning, it's the longest Shadowrun actual play that exists out there. If you take a look at my podcast between the Arcology regular episodes and the actual play, and also I have a Legends of Earth Dawn, which is an Earth Dawn actual play, which is sort of a Shadowrun, but before, when it's fantasy. That's a really crude way of describing it, but I've like published somewhere in the neighborhood of, put out there some of the neighborhood of over 400 hours of audio for you to go listen to.
Awesome.
Slowed down a lot lately, mainly just initially because of some burnout, but also mental emotional health and the crazy world making me maybe have anxiety about making myself visible out in it a little bit, and trying to overcome that. I still haven't won that battle yet, but those of you who are hoping for more ecology episodes, they will be coming unless I die first. But I will be doing that. I'm not going to give up on it. I've always said before, the Shadowrun or the ecology podcast ends when I'm dead. So, and I intend to stick to that. But yeah, so much stuff out there, and it's been fun doing basically a really long Shadowrun campaign. It's been challenging from a GM perspective and a story perspective because things ramp up and it's hard to go back to other stuff. So we've had in the beginning it was very street level, and I tried to keep that for as long as I could. Shadowrunners just doing their best and getting screwed over, and one of them gets CFD and murders their fixer, and one of the characters is a teenager who has to deal with having high school and a mom, and she gets her head cut off by somebody at some point. It's actually kind of the fault of the Shadowrun team because they didn't stop to negotiate and do the safe thing. They're always jumping into action, but it was also kind of the fault of another character because backstory stuff. Anyway, I get to weave all this stuff in. What Jennifer said about telling micro stories in a macro universe, that's what I'm really interested in. I do not give two drecks about Damian Knight or Harlequin or Aaron the Scribe. I just don't care what they're doing. Like, who cares? Like, I want to know what my player characters are doing, or what the protagonist of the story and how it's affecting their life, to bring the world to life through the experience of the characters. It just makes it more real and more fun, more grounded. My least favorite stories of really any IP, not just Shadowrun, other ones that focus on the really big players. I just don't care. I want to feel something about these people, and that's sort of where I like to tread with telling the stories. So what I like to do as a GM technique is just plant a lot of seeds, sort of broadcast a bunch of different seeds of ideas here and there, and just see which ones stick or sprout, or the players latch onto and cultivate. And probably, I'm not going to tell a bunch of stories, but I'm going to tell this one. There's the characters had the runners had they needed to interrogate someone who as part of a job, and it was messy. It was in a warehouse in the Barrens, and I figured a nearby ghoul maybe smelled the food. Ghouls are people who get infected with a disease that makes them have to eat, that makes them have to be cannibals, or else they'll starve to death. And so they discovered this ghoul that was sort of lurking at the edges of things. Well, they're keeping tabs on stuff because they're murdering somebody inside. They don't want people peeking in or whatever. And they go and confront him and talk to him, and find it's just this really super hungry dude his name is Frank. He used to work at a stuffer shack. He used to be a vegan. He hates being a ghoul. He's grossed out by the idea of having to eat metahuman flesh, but he needs it or he's going to die. And like the team sort of took him under his wing a little bit. There was a lot of story arcs that went on about Frank the Ghoul, who eventually became a leader of this sort of ghoul community, sort of a small ghoul community in Redmond, who would be very careful about how they sourced their food, ethical about that. And it's the idea that you don't kill your food. You only eat food that has been ethically sourced, not by being killed by you, so unfortunately they have to they have to subsist on a lot of things like medical waste or body disposals from criminals, but they also, the ones that if they really hardline stick to it, they won't eat people who have been murdered by someone else either.
Cannibalistic veganism. It's fascinating.
I've actually dropped in my Shadowrun fiction the concept of vegan ghouls, and it's stuck, and I love it.
Wow.
Just a ghoul vegan is a ghoul that they ethically source their food as best they can. But yeah,
That's amazing.
The player characters dropped tens of thousands of new yen on this guy's replacement cyber arm because he got killed in some, or not killed, got really messed up in some like retaliation that they were kind of tangentially involved with. It was.
And all of this is in
Frank
the
the Ghoul.
arcology. This is all in the arcology actual play.
It's one of the many plot threads.
Awesome.
That again, I just sort of plant these different seeds and see. There's lots of other NPCs and things that I've dropped in or played that just nobody refers to, and they get forgotten and left along the way. That's fine. They're go living their own lives and their own other stories. But the way you seem like you're really smart and that you're a mastermind. You planned everything out, and you've got all these weaving plots that you've got, all this stuff in the background with the yarn tying it all together. It's all none of that really. What it is you just drop little ideas in, and then you bring back the ones that people like. Cool. And it weaves it into a story that feels very relevant and grounded with the players. They feel more involved with it, and it's a lot of fun to just build upon that. It gets difficult way toward the end, way toward the campaign, where things get way more powerful, and you have to figure out, okay, well, they just went to a meta plane and met the sea dragon who sent them on an errand, and gave them a submarine. Now what do I do?
Cool.
Specific example of unreleased actual content.
We'd never have unedited episodes sitting in an archive somewhere. Well, Joel, you have done cyberpunk fantasy cookbooks. What else have you been working on within the genre?
Within the genre writ large, I'm also part of Frag and Unicorn Games, and so I've been working with both Opti and Cliff on some of the upcoming releases and some of the fantasy and lore behind that. That started from working on Shadowrun recipes and kind of thinking about the culture, the culinary anthropology of Shadowrun and what it meant in that world. And one of my Shadowrun goals is to end up on the Arcology podcast for one episode. I've not yet gotten to, get my way past the coffee makers into the Arcology. But what I work on a lot is kind of enhancing those little corners in between what's published and giving space for people to find it. And I think Jennifer is somebody who is a really good example of the big pillars who uses that space to kind of bring in even bigger stories. And that's why I'm kind of like tossing the mic over to her right now as we're getting closer to the top of the hour.
Okay. Yeah. I have two stories, and you guys are going to choose which one you want to hear. Do you want to hear about my podcasting, or do you want to hear about how I ended up working for Harebrained Schemes on
Video games?
Okay, video games. So I had experience working on Ion. It was a AAA MMO, and I also was a Shadowrun writer. I also lived in Redmond at the time. I live in Bothell now. I am in the Seattle area. And John Helfer says, "Hey, Harebrained Schemes needs a writer desperately right now. Do you have time?" And I said, "Okay." He said, "Well, they'll want to interview you." So I showed up at Harebrained Schemes, and we started the interview with Jordan Weissman and Mitch Glittleman. I don't know if you guys know who those people are.
Nope.
You should say who they are just so everybody else gets on board.
Well, creators of Shadowrun.
Indeed.
The people who started it.
I've interviewed them. It was probably the most intimidating interview, though they were super nice.
Well, see,
I was just intimidated by how
I knew by reputation that they were these people, but honestly, I wasn't that impressed. Because one, I'm good at what I do, and two, I knew they needed me. I didn't know how much. So my interview was 4 hours long. And it started with Mitch Glittleman showing me some dialogue and saying, "We need someone to fix all of the dialogue in Dead Man's Switch." And the first thing he did was he showed me the good answer, the neutral answer, and the mean answer. And the mean answer had a gender-based slur in it. And I looked at him, I said, oh, I can see why. I do get to change that, don't I? And his face was like, I don't understand. And then he stops and he really reads what's on the page. And then his face is doing what Joel's face is doing with the, oh yes, this is in fact exactly why we're hiring. This is one of the reasons. I'm like, all right, okay. All of those will be gone, just so you know. There will be no gender-based slurs, period. Because we don't know who the gender of the player is. Then the second part of my interview was they looked at me and said, we're going to have you write the opening screen, the load screen, knowing nothing of the story. And you have 200 words and, how long do you think you'll need? I'm like, I need an hour, but I am going to get paid for this, aren't I? And again, his face went, yes, you can charge, because also I had to do some editing as well. So he's like, okay, you can charge up to 4 hours for this, even if we don't hire you. I'm like, all right, fine. While I was in the middle of writing this, the scene where the apartment was good because it wasn't actually on fire, Jordan walked into the place where I was and started building a desk. Because they had an open plan and they had a new writer who needed a desk. So I'm sitting there trying to write for this job interview. And Jordan's like, oh, don't mind me. And he literally builds a desk while I'm there. And I'm like, okay, I think I know what I'm getting into. And that was the first part. And then I got to take interview work home to edit and send back to them. And then they immediately hired me. And I rewrote all the dialogue on Dead Man Switch.
Wow.
So
wow. So
I got hired.
Dead Man Switch was on which system?
That was the very first game that came out. That was the Kickstarter game.
Gotcha.
PC
okay,
initially.
PC one.
And then from there, you
The sort
also
of sequel to the old Super Nintendo version.
Yeah, it was the Super Nintendo version had Sam Burner in it, and Dead Man Switch was Sam Burner dying and activating a thing, which the player then had to do. And there were little things like you have to write the load screen in second person without telling the player what they're actually feeling. And there's very technical bits to it. But I got to meet Mitch and I got to meet Jordan, and it was quite the experience. And I enjoyed working with them quite a bit.
That's so cool. Awesome.
So now you know how I got hired.
That's so cool. Thank you. And we are getting super close to the top of the hour. But gosh, it was lovely speaking with all of you. As always, thank you for your tireless work, building the stories of the Shadows and a world so many of us love.
Thanks for having us on.
Thank you. This has been fun. And now I have faces to names too.
Have us back. We'll do this again.
Up next is episode 3 of Shadowrun's 6th World, Emerald Glitch, where we start the case of the Wayward Courier. Don't forget that we have a wonderful partner and sponsor in Catalyst Game Labs, and we'll be hosting a giveaway this week for a PDF of Shadowrun 6th World Seattle Edition. Enter to win by typing #RemPC in the chat, and you can get additional entries to win by going to our donation page at www.remalternus.com/Nguyen. All donations help us to pay our cast and crew and keep producing content. And our biggest donors can have a message read at the end of the episode by the Shadowrunner of their choice. So check it out. And please remember to check out the Kickstarter for Misspent Youth, Fall in Love, Not in Line, an RPG about teen angst, friendship, and rebellion. Stand up to the authority and fight injustice with a rules-light, highly narrative and story-focused game, now live on Kickstarter at www.remalternus.com/misspent-youth. Next week, our Shadowrunners will be taking some well-earned downtime, but don't worry, we will still be here with Rules of Cool and the premiere of our monthly one-shot show where we will feature Misspent Youth. We'll talk with the creator, Robert Bull, the lead developer, Clifton Lambert, and OC Opti Presley, the founder of Fragging Unicorns Games. Then we'll do an actual play of Misspent Youth with some new faces from Rem Alternus Productions. You won't want to miss it, so we'll see you next week, REM PCs. Bye.